Prime Minister, welcome to the program. Now, you've made a series of energy announcements during the week, but there's one we haven't heard yet. Will you commit Australia to achieving a net zero emissions target by 2050?
Well, as you know, our policy is to achieve that in the second half of this century, and I will certainly achieve that. And that's why this week's announcements were so important, because it was about the technology we need to invest in now, which will make it a reality, particularly on the other side of 2030. And I think even the sort of target you've talked about then becomes absolutely achievable. I'm interested in doing the things that make that happen, and I think that is very achievable, but it involves making the investments that we have set out for ARENA and the CFC this week. That's how you actually get there, and that's what matters, because we're very focused on lower emissions, and I believe that can be achieved, but what I'm more focused on is the doing.
Well, the technology roadmap is about to be released. The government's been working on this for a while. So just to be clear on this, you're saying a net zero target by 2050, it can be achieved, but it won't be in the roadmap as the end goal here, as the actual target?
Well, the technology roadmap, as you say, will be released shortly. What we've been saying all along, though, is it's about the technology, and that will produce the results. And the results means lower emissions. And what we need to do is make sure the investments are driven by having lower emissions, lower costs, and supporting both today's jobs and future jobs.
But you've got to know where you're going, haven't you, PM? You've got to know what the end of the road is.
We do know where we're going. Yeah, we do. And the end of the road is lower costs, lower emissions, and more jobs. That's where we're going. And on the 2020 target, well, of course, we've just met that target very comfortably by 430 million tonnes. And I remind you, as you will recall, back in 2013, we took a plan to the election to achieve that. That was actually dismissed. But we had a plan to achieve a 2020 target, and we've achieved it, and not only just achieved it, we've bettered it. And the same will be true for 2030, and the investments we've outlined this week and the many other initiatives we're already engaged in.
And I'll come to those.
2030 targets as well.
Just on 2050, I mean, you've got the Farmers Federation, the Business Council, every state and territory, more than 100 countries have all committed to this. Why won't you commit to that target?
Because I'm more interested in the doing, David. I know people get very focused on the politics of these commitments, but what I'm focused on is on the technology that delivers lower emissions, lower costs and more jobs.
Okay.
That's what actually matters to people. That's what changes their lives. And so that's what we're delivering. And when we make a commitment, we meet it. And we don't just meet it, we beat it. That's our form.
But you won't make this commitment?
We're committed to investing in the technology which reduces emissions in this country. And I think those sort of things are achievable with the right investments in the right technology. And you won't get there, I'll guarantee you this, if you're going to narrow the sorts of technologies and the sorts of solutions that you're prepared to look at.
Well, let's talk about that.
We want to broaden that out. Yeah.
So let's talk about what you have announced during the week. Is the government still committed to a technology agnostic approach to achieving the cheapest, most reliable power?
Of course we are.
So when the Liddell coal-fired power station closes in 2023 or before, does it have to be gas that replaces it?
Well, gas has chosen itself, because as yet there has been nothing that has been presented which meets the goals that we have, which is reliability and the firming capability for renewables to meet the gap that will be created. But of the 1,000 megawatts that are needed to replace Liddell, there'll be a mixture. There will be gas, but there will also be some form of a traditional coal-fired which will make up part of that. But there'll also be battery as well. That's all part of the 1,000 megawatts.
But you're threatening to build a new gas-fired...
So it's not just one.
You're threatening to build a new gas-fired power plant. Why not
because
say...
that's the bit that's missing.
Well, why not say to the market, here's what we need, give us the best, most cost-effective option you can?
Well, that's exactly what we've said to the market. We're saying, you step up, we'll step back. Now, if they can produce that on the rules, and the rules of the reliability and affordable, and it meets the challenges that we have with the closure of Liddell, the market should go right ahead. They should knock themselves out. That's what we actually want them to do.
But it has to be 1,000 megawatts? It has to be 1,000 megawatts. Sorry? And what are the rules here? What are you actually asking for?
Well, the 1,000 megawatts are already being made up in part by some investments, which I believe definitely will go ahead. I think Energy Australia is very close to going ahead with a number of projects. As I said, there are a number of battery projects. There are a range of projects that will make up that 1,000, and that is the market.
So what's the missing piece?
Well, there's about 250 megawatts or thereabouts that we believe are going to be necessary to fill that plan out, and we can do that and deliver it on the ground, and that's important, David. A lot of people can talk projects, but they've got to get approved, they've got to be built in time, and you can get a gas-fired power station built in that time and delivered when it'll be there. It won't be on the wish list, it'll be on the done list, and that's what we need to be in place. And that will meet the criteria. Now, if there are others who come up with a better plan and can deliver that plan in the time frame and meet the reliability, great, tremendous.
All right, so you're at least open.
Hasn't happened yet, though.
OK, we'll see what comes up based on that definition there of 250 megawatts. You also announced you want to expand the remit of the...
For that component, yeah.
For that component, OK. You also want to expand the remit of the Renewable Energy Agency to fund non-renewable energy options, including carbon capture and storage. You're putting an extra $50 million into carbon capture and storage research. Look, PM, as you know, Australian taxpayers have spent more than $1 billion, I think, now over many years trying to see if carbon capture and storage will work one day. The fossil fuel industry keeps saying it's just around the corner. What makes you think that this will be a viable option one day?
It's already happening at Gorgon. There's already projects that Santos are wanting to pursue. And for our resource base, David, then we have the most skin in the game to make sure that we can make it work. I'm not prepared to give up on it. I'm prepared to keep looking for the answers in this area because it'll reduce emissions and it'll support jobs in Australia. And that's why I think Australia has a special interest in wanting to ensure that if anyone's going to crack this technology for those resources, then it'll be us.
But the Gorgon project, sorry to jump in there, the Gorgon project you mentioned isn't operating yet, as I understand it. The Santos project, well, they say it would need a carbon price of nearly $30 a tonne.
Well, whether it needs that or not, David, the point is that carbon capture and storage, when you say it's a myth and will never happen...
Well, it's expensive, is the point. That's what the companies are saying. It's expensive.
Yeah, but this is why it's an emerging technology. I mean, we're also investing in hydrogen. That's not a reality to the extent we'd like it to be now, but if you go back 10 years ago, the story was very different. So our argument on ARENA is this, that solar and wind, which dominated a lot of the last 10 years and a lot of the work that ARENA did, fine. It's established it commercially viable, it's got scale, it stands on its own 2 feet. We now need to invest in the technologies for that next generation that will be there post-2030 and post-2025. And so, yeah, that goes in the mix, but so does a range of other issues. And we want it to be able to look at things at how steelmaking is done in Australia, how we build residential buildings and how we run hotels and HVAC systems, all of these things which lower emissions and change how industries operate and at the same time ensures that we're reducing the emissions in those businesses. But
on this one, I mean...
Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to achieve. We're not trying to achieve any particular kind of renewable technology. We're trying to lower emissions. I mean, soil carbon, for example, is something that can be funded under this. Now, soil carbon is a negative emissions technology, effectively. And and Australia has an opportunity to do very well there. And that means it can achieve all the sorts of ambitions that we started the interview talking about.
On coal, Prime Minister, can you just clarify for us, is there realistically any chance of a new coal-fired power station now being built in Australia?
Well, it's been a while since there's been one, but there have been some new ones. We do have a feasibility study which is being funded up in Collinsville, and that was done genuinely. We promised that we would do that. That study's now underway, and that's a question that's being in the process of being answered. So I'm not going to prejudice the outcome.
But with Liddell, for example, there's a lot of talk about making AGL sell off that coal-fired power plant, someone else running it. I mean, that's obviously not going to happen now. Has the world moved on?
Well, it'll be driven by the economics, ultimately. And I'm not about to sort of rule things out unless the economics rules them out, ultimately. And that's why, if CCS is able to be established, then these are game-changing technologies. So whether it's viable in these forms, that is the very proposition that is being put as part of that Collinsville project, which is not a large project, but it's an important project for industry. And regardless of whether, I mean, if that proves feasible, fine. If it doesn't, then we still have heavy industry challenges. And that's why the funds we've announced this week to change and improve how industry can operate. I mean, I made announcements in the Hunter and in the Illawarra. I mean, they are the oldest in heavy industry regions in our country. I want those sectors to be successful, those regions to be successful in the future. And if you go up to Gladstone and places like that, I want them to be successful. And that means finding reliable energy solutions with technology and harnessing what we have well into the future, because their jobs are important to them.
Let me leave the energy space. In a week, just over a week, the JobKeeper and the Job Seeker payments will be reduced by about $300 a fortnight. Has Treasury done any modelling on the impact this will have on the economy?
Well, what we've seen in the last 3 months is over 400,000 jobs come back into the economy. And that is good news. That's encouraging news. We're just over half of the way back. And JobKeeper has played, with JobSeeker, an incredibly important role in keeping people in positions. But what was more interesting about the figures this week, David, is that we saw the effective rate of unemployment fall from over 14% when it peaked after the crisis hit, and that went down to 9.3%. Now, I've always said that the actual rate of unemployment is a lot higher than that measured rate. Always been upfront about that. And what I found most encouraging about the jobs numbers this week is that effective rate of unemployment was coming down, which means this: those who had been reduced to 0 hours are starting to get the hours back.
Well, I want to ask you about that, but just coming back to the question, has Treasury modelled the impact of reducing the JobKeeper and JobSeeker payments?
Well, we're moving forward to the budget in just under 2 weeks' time, and there are a range of measures that are in the budget, I can assure you, which are going to be boosting aggregate demand.
I'm sure that's the case, but I'm just asking you, and surely you must have had the experts look at this.
My point, David, is that they take into account... Sorry, I'll let you finish.
Well, this is a big call. We're in the middle of a recession. You're reducing these payments. What does Treasury say the impact will be on the economy?
Well, what Treasury says is that we need to boost aggregate demand in our economy, and that the full suite of measures that you have as a government need to do that job, and that's what the budget will do. And so you don't have to hold on to every measure forever. There are other measures that come in and pick up from where others left off. We're transitioning JobKeeper. It's important to do that. We always said it was not something that could be around forever. JobKeeper also finds its level where the need is greatest. 60% of the JobKeeper payments that will be made at the end of this month will be in Victoria. I mean, Victoria will count for more JobKeeper payments than all the other states put together.
Well, unemployment's still rising in Victoria. Do you think unemployment will keep rising?
So it's a program that finds its need. It's a program that finds its level of need, David, and JobSeeker's the same. But there are other programs, and the Treasurer will go into greater detail about that, obviously, in the budget, which are dealing with the here and now, but rebuilding our economy and then building it for the future, so we can go into a decade of prosperity. Do
you think unemployment nationally will keep rising from this point?
Well, it's a bit hard to say on the measured rate, David, I must say. And there are conflicting views. I mean, the figures that came out this week were a pleasant encouragement in terms of their improvement. But for those who still don't have a job, that is of no comfort to them.
But has it peaked now? What's your view of it? What's your sense of it?
Well, I'm watching these issues closely, and I'm pleased that we've seen over 400,000 jobs come back. I think we're going to see more jobs come back over the next 3 months.
It might have peaked,
particularly no, David, I'm trying to answer the question. Okay. If you'd let me answer the question. I'm saying there's going to be more jobs come back in. Now, the measured rate of unemployment will depend on how many people, what the participation rate is and all of those things. But what I'm saying is we've had over 400,000 jobs come back in. I think we're going to see hundreds of thousands of more jobs come back in between now and Christmas, particularly if we get this next step right in Victoria. I mean, the number of jobs went backwards in Victoria in the last month. We'll see Victoria bounce back. That'll add to the national jobs growth. Now, where the actual level of measured unemployment is by Christmas, it's hard to say at the moment, I've got to say. I hope it's lower. But at the moment, it is hard to say where the course of the pandemic is, because it's not just about what's happening in Australia, David. It's also about what's happening around the world. We're in the middle of a global pandemic recession, And so Australia's growth is going to also be affected by that as well. And they're issues that are well beyond our control. So we'll keep getting it right here and keep seeing the jobs come back. And importantly, that has meant extra jobs coming back for women and young people.
A final one, Prime Minister, the relationship with China. It seems to deteriorate continually. Do you have any plan for a circuit breaker here? Any plan as to how you can at least restore communication between ministers?
Well, look, there is communication, obviously, between our two countries, and there is quite regular communication at that official level.
Not at the ministerial level.
We're always available. Well, that was the point I was just about to make. I mean, obviously, we'd welcome that, and as soon as it takes two parties to actually have that engagement.
How do you do that, though? What's your plan to make that happen?
Well, David, our plan is to always be consistent about Australia's national interests. Our plan is to be very clear about what we're seeking to do, and to ensure that the offerings that we're making from the Australian economy, whether it's in our resources sector, our agricultural sector, our services sector, they're compelling offers because our trading relationship is a mutual one. It's not all one way. We both benefit from it, and I believe the Chinese government understands that as well. What we're also doing, David, is we're working constructively with all the other partners in the region who also want to see a balanced Indo-Pacific and a safe and secure Indo-Pacific that respects the sovereignty of every country in the Indo-Pacific, and we're big supporters of that, and we're working constructively with partners like Japan and India in particular, Indonesia, Singapore and so many others, Vietnam. I mean, one of the most important relationships we've been developing most recently outside of Indonesia in the region has been with Vietnam, who have proved to be a great strategic partner on many issues within the Indo-Pacific. So the way I think we come through this is by drawing together a region that's focused on stability, and I think that will improve relations within the region more broadly.
Prime Minister, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks a lot, David.